Hello and welcome to Alternatives 2 with me, Rob, and today we're going to be looking at Wastelands 3. Well, I say Wastelands 3. See, here's the thing about Wastelands. It's a post-apocalyptic, turn-based tactical action RPG type game, and if you played the first two Wastelands games, great. You basically know what you're getting into. The third game follows on from the first two games, but this time it's set in the freezing wastelands of a post-apocalyptic Colorado, and you'll take control of the last surviving member of Team November, which is a squad of rangers. And much like other tactical turn-based action RPG type games, think XCOM, that sort of game, you'll be involved in loads of different battles. You'll have to wander around gathering supplies and gathering stuff like that. But we're not here to talk about the game itself. We're here to talk about alternatives to Wastelands 3 that you could play if maybe you're not a fan of Wastelands 3, or you want something that's, a little bit different but still in the same sort of vein. Or maybe you just like your post-apocalyptic action RPGs. So we're going to start at the beginning. We're going to start with the most obvious relationship to Wastelands in general, which is Fallout. But not the Fallout that you know, because most probably the Fallout that you know is Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, Fallout 4, Fallout 76. We're going to start with Fallout 1 and 2, with a special mention for tactics, but we won't go into tactics. Fallout 1 and 2 are the main ones we're going to focus on first, and I'm including those two as one entry because Fallout is kind of the granddaddy of post-apocalyptic isometric action RPG type games, and there is so much you can do in the original Fallout, but Fallout 2 then built on that and really pushed the boat out with it. And both of them were published by Interplay and developed by the legendary Blackout Studio, who also made Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale and games like that. And the legacy of Blackout Studio, you can see it through a whole range of the gaming industry, especially when it comes to isometric RPGs. Fallout was a revelation. It was something so completely different when it came out back in 1997 and 1998. First game was set in the mid-21st century, and you basically had a worldwide conflict that was brought on by global petrol shortages, and several nations entered into a resource war. The vaults were created, and you basically are a vault dweller, which in this case is not a derogatory term. You basically survived the apocalypse, and you emerged from the apocalypse to basically get a water chip that will restore the water functionality of your vault. I'm paraphrasing here, because it is a bit more complicated than that. And so you have to explore the world of Fallout and get the resources you need in order to repair the chip or replace the chip, and there are all sorts of things you can do as part of that. But then Fallout 2 is set in 2241, and it starts in the primitive town of Arroyo, which suffers the worst drought on record, and you, as the chosen one and the descendant of the Vault Dweller, have to perform a series of quests to retrieve a Garden of Eden creation kit, or GECK, for Arroyo. Now, the GECK is a device that can create thriving communities out of the post-apocalyptic wasteland, and you basically have to take on the role of the chosen one in the typical kind of fantasy setting, but this is post-apocalypse, and you have to help the town survive. So, yeah, Fallout is very much related to Wastelands. Wastelands and Fallout have inspired each other over the years, and the idea of Fallout began with Wasteland. Back when it was released in 1988, the original Wasteland game, then evolved to become Fallout, which then evolved to become Wasteland 2, which then evolved to become, whatever it became. And now Wastelands 3 is coming out. Moving on from that, we have a slightly different game. This one is an indie game from a development team called Atom Team, and this is called Atom RPG. Now, this is set in Russia, and it came out in 2018. It's an alternate world, nuclear war has happened, and it's very much like Metro, but kind of an isometric version of Metro. There's a lot of dialogue in this game, which it's really impressive, the level of dialogue in this game and the level of detail in this game for an indie game. It's out on PC and it's out on iOS as well as Linux, and it's one of those games where initially it doesn't look like a lot. Initially it doesn't look like it's anything really different from other games that you've played, but there are echoes in this game of Fallout and other games as well. The development team have been inspired by things like System Shock and Deus Ex and Baldur's Gate. Baldur's Gate and Fallout are obvious in this game, but System Shock and Deus Ex, not as much until you get into the middle and late game. That's when the echoes of System Shock and Deus Ex really start showing their heads. When you get into Atom RPG, you'll find that it is a very immersive experience because of the level of dialogue and because of the level of choice that you have. And it plays a lot like the original two Fallout games and like the Wastelands games, but it's more of a single-player game rather than a team-based tactical action RPG. It's one of those games that you really have to sit down and put some time into before you start getting the rewards out of it. If you're a fan of games like Fallout, and if you're a fan of these immersive experiences where there's a lot of dialogue and there's a lot of story and there's a lot of exposition, that happens through the world itself and through the people in that world, then there's a lot of reward in this game. And so, yeah, that's one that came as a surprise to me when I tried it. I wasn't exactly sure what to expect because I played the mobile version of this game before I played the PC version. The mobile version is a very good port, I have to say. So yeah, it's worth trying either version of it. It's very, very good. And lastly, I had options for this last one. I'll be honest. I had so many options for this last one, but there was only one that really stood out to me as kind of a broken masterpiece. And it's a shame that the world hasn't been expanded on. It's a shame that Troika Games really couldn't take this any further. And credit to Sierra for getting this game out. Arcanum of Steamworks and Magick Obscura. And a lot of people probably don't know that title or have probably seen that title in passing, especially if you're a PC gamer. Arcanum is probably one of the most underrated fantasy steampunk worlds to exist in video games. And when I say that, I'm not talking about they just slapped a few cogs on. I'm talking about an actual structured world that technically is post-apocalyptic because there is an ancient civilization that existed before the current races exist in the world of Arcanum. But Arcanum has ogres with suits. Right? Victorian suits. I'm talking proper Industrial Revolution type stuff. You have orcs with monocles and shotguns. We're talking quite literally a world of magic with elves and dwarves and gnomes and all that stuff going through an Industrial Revolution. A proper Industrial Revolution where you have magic and science really at war with each other, and that creates all sorts of divides. It creates racial divides between the magical creatures who really can't adapt to science because their magic affects science, but it doesn't work as well with science, and science doesn't work as well around magic. And the two conflict. You have a racial divide because of this, the creatures with very little magic rely on science, and the creatures with more magic in their bodies rely on magic, and so there is a kind of an underlying race war going on. You have this economic divide, because the people who want the science is in the ascendance, and you have the races who aren't as scientific, they are becoming poorer, and they are shrinking and going back into their enclaves to protect themselves and protect their race, and so they are losing money, and so you have an economic divide that's forming as well. There are all sorts of divides that are being created between different classes, different characters, different races, different companies. And this creates this fascinating world where the narrative is actually exposed through the game in a very natural way. You don't have to stress about learning this or that or the other, because the game takes time to explain it to you. Okay, there are problems with the combat system. You have real-time or turn-based combat, and both are very, very clunky. The class system is a little bit shonky at times, but the crafting is just a masterpiece, a hidden gem of the crafting game. It is anyone who loves crafting in games needs to play Arcanum, because it is probably the biggest hidden gem of crafting games around. That's my 3 alternatives to Wastelands 3. There are a few honourable mentions which I do want to throw out there. Planescape Torment, Planescape Tides of Numenera. There are reasons for that one. Tyranny, an interesting one, and Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. Are you looking forward to playing Wastelands 3? And what games would you play as an addition to or an alternative to Wastelands 3? Let us know in the comments below. I'll see you all next time.